Perfect. Welcome to the Sweet Science of Fighting podcast. Today we have Colm Woulfe. Welcome, Colm.
Hey, thanks for having me.
No, thanks for coming on. So, for anyone who's not aware of you, do you want to give us a brief background of yourself? I know you're heavily into strongman, and you've also have a MMA background.
Yep, so I like a bit of a stretch to say I was an MMA fighter or anything like that, but I did start off. I've had two amateur fights basically with a 50-50 record, so nothing
Accounts.
fancy. But from there I ended up going into strongman, where I did a lot better than I did at MMA, and ended up going on to compete at World's Strongest Man. So I've been there a couple of times, and then I also did my master's degree at AUT along with yourself, and my thesis was on strongman training. So the acute physiological effects of strongman training. So I've been pretty obsessed with it. And yeah, I quite like talking about it.
Yeah, you've published, I think, one or two papers, I guess, in the very few papers that actually been published in strongman. I guess you've got
Yeah,
one or two of them now, because there's only maybe a handful, correct?
yeah,
On
there's
different.
really not much. Like I was having a look a few weeks ago in the hopes. So since finishing my study, like I haven't I stay up to date with the research a little bit, but I haven't really like delved into it. And I remember having a look maybe a month ago and was like, man, there's still really not that much out there
Yeah,
compared to back then when we were at uni.
yeah, shit, yeah. All right. Well, what we'll do is we'll go into a little bit of strongman training for combat sports. Obviously, it's still a relatively hot topic. People are using various strongman exercises, I don't know, strongman programs, even pure strength sport programs. So I wanted to get your take on taking pure strongman or pure strength sport training programs as a way to prepare for combat sports, whether that's MMA, BJJ, striking, whatever it is. Do you see that as something that can be done, should be done, as a good idea, or do you have a different approach that you think fits?
So personally, as much as I love strongman and like strength training in general, I just don't think it's a wise choice to pair the two together in terms of doing like you can't just do a strongman training program and then train MMA. Um, it's just you're not really going to be developing the qualities that you want for MMA. You'll definitely get stronger, but all that training is just going to add so much fatigue for your MMA training. Um, I have done it myself, and it did not work well back in the day when I was doing MMA. So there can be like similar crossover things. Can be a little bit certain exercises can be a little bit more specific. Say sandbag carries, that sort of thing. Opposed to just doing traditional strength training. But I don't. The idea that you could just pick up any basic kind of strength training and pair it alongside, your prep for a fight, I wouldn't advise that at all. I could see, let's say in the off season, let's say you're moving up a weight class or something like that. You're a fighter, you've been, you've got a big frame, and you're probably going to have to move up. Let's say in the off season, I could see a place for some strength training or using the strongman exercises in that regard to help put on some size far away from a fight. Even then, I definitely wouldn't train someone how I would train them to compete in strongman. Again, even in the off season, even if you're not having like lots of heavy sparring sessions or whatnot, the fatigue cost is just too high, and I think the risk of injury is just not worth it to do. So when I'm talking about like a traditional strongman training, I'm talking about, say, four or less reps from failure on the implements, so quite close to maximal. Like most common, to be honest. So to step back a little bit, the most common, unfortunately, still strongman training program, you'll see someone take a powerlifting program, and then they just have an events day where they essentially just max out every strongman exercise they have for their next competition. So I don't think that's the smartest approach for strongman. And I wouldn't, I think it's even worse to have an MMA program and then chuck that in on top. But again, that situation I was talking about before, where you're far away from your next fight, you're trying to put on some muscle, I could see a place for, say, some farmer's walk, some sandbag carries, sled drag, sled pulls, that sort of thing. But the, say, heavy stones, heavy yoke walk, I just don't think that's a smart idea. Um, Cost benefit wise, I don't like, will it make you stronger in a general sense? Yes. But there's probably, well, there is more efficient ways to do that, like sticking with regular gym training. Um, just the nature of carrying like a truly heavy weight on your back and then trying to move quick with it. Um, like just saying it out loud, I'm sure it sounds more dangerous than standing in a rack doing a squat. And then we've also got a bit of research on it showing the same thing, that it's about um, about twice the risk basically of getting hurt doing strongman training opposed to general strength training.
Mm.
So yeah, there's definitely some elements that you could use from it. But yeah, just taking if you just Google strongman training program, take whatever pops up there and try to combine it with your fight training, I would not advise that.
I didn't realize it was twice the risk with some of those. I guess you could see it like with, I guess, the events like moving quickly, as you're saying, with the unstable yoke on your back with weights heavier
Yeah,
than your squat and stuff like that. The risk to reward
there.
isn't so great.
It's a study by Justin and Paul Winwood.
Okay.
Um, yeah, I might be off on the exact number, but I think it's about 2 times. Um, so still like safer than a lot of sports if you look at their injury rates per 1,000
Yeah.
hours. But again, like why take that risk? You know.
Yeah.
Plus, let's say you were trying to put on size or increase your strength for to help with wrestling or something like that. Um, Carrying a yoke again, yeah, it'll get you stronger, but is it going to get you as strong as just doing, let's say, some squats? Probably not. The range of motion is much better in squats. You can load it more evenly. So yeah, and less risk. So it just doesn't make sense.
What kind of volume were you doing when you were combining strongman and MMA? For the people listening, so they know, like, okay, I won't do that. Do you remember?
So basically, I was doing exactly what I just advised against doing. But I was only, this is when we were at uni. So
Yeah,
um,
young,
I was just a
full of,
typical,
yeah,
yeah,
full of recovery.
yeah. I was a typical meathead, and I was only doing MMA 3 times a week. Like
Yeah,
we had a Tuesday evening, Thursday evening, and then Saturday morning. Um, and then I would do strongman training, I think 2 to 3 times a week. Every now and again, though, I would, instead of doing the MMA training on Saturday, I would do strongman, and it was
yeah.
exactly what I just described. So I would know, let's say I knew what 6 events I would have, I would just go as heavy as I possibly could on those events every Saturday. And honestly, those sessions were like 4 to 5 hours. It wasn't
Oh,
smart. Lots of the time is with strongman is like setting up the gear, so it's not
yeah,
like I was just straight training, but it's still yeah, it's not smart. But as a student, I could kind of get away with it. Plus, I wasn't that strong, so it's not like the loads were
mm,
super heavy. But still, I think I was lucky to get away without hurting myself.
yeah. Fair call. The I guess strongman, as you mentioned, taking a strongman program probably isn't ideal, but you mentioned obviously there's strongman exercises and things in strongman that can potentially help carry over to various grappling and other sports or other combat sports. Is there, I guess, any exercises in particular that you're fond of in terms of maybe carry over to combat sports?
So I'll go through like because we're talking strongman, there's always I'll just talk about the most common ones.
Yeah,
Like so, I'll go through the list. So let's start with log press. Um, I'm sure you're familiar with log press. It's always like it's the staple overhead event of strongman. I don't personally. I don't think it's worth doing for fighters either. You can get away with it. So a log has neutral handles, so you will be holding it like this. It can be a little bit easier on the shoulders, and so I could actually see, to go back on that a little bit, you could use, say, an 8-inch diameter log, so it's not too big. Let's say you've got shoulder issues, you want to do your push presses or whatever, some kind of explosive upper body movement. you could definitely do a log that way, like an 8-inch log. But the ones that we use for competition, they tend to be 10 to 12 inches. And I do get asked quite a lot, like by athletes of all sorts of sports, like, oh, like, do you think I should incorporate log into my, should I get it one of those logs? I don't think so. A 10 to 12-inch log, it's so big that it requires you to
Damn
put
big.
yourself, yeah, ideally, you want to put yourself in a large amount of thoracic extension. But if you're not flexible enough to do that, it's going to come from lumbar. And you'll see, like most, let's say world's strongest man, right? Most of the guys are giants. So comparatively, 12-inch diameter is not going to be as big. But let's say you're under, like, so an extreme, let's use Hafthor, like 6'9", that 12 inches, he's going to be able to maintain a relatively neutral spine in that position. If suddenly you're under 6 foot, but you still have to balance this 12-inch diameter log, one, it's putting yourself, like, you're not in the most stable position. And two, in terms of the actual exercise performance, you're not going to be able to transfer all your power into it anyway. It's the challenging aspect of the log is no longer going to become your pressing power, but it's going to be like your ability to stabilize it in that position. So one, I don't think it's safe, and two, I just don't think it's effective in terms of what it offers you. But yeah, I could see, say, an 8-inch log, you could get away with doing that, or you could just do like a football bar, same grip. Again, it's just a small diameter, it's not going to put you out. So log, those are my thoughts on log. So next I would go, say, monster dumbbell, much the same. So that's a big, you clean it up with one hand and then you press it any way you can overhead. Same sort of deal with log. Again, it's not, you might as well train the same qualities with different exercises. I wouldn't bother giving that one a go. So an axle, another overhead one, I definitely wouldn't do it either. It's just, you've seen people continental cleaning, right?
Yeah.
So you stick it onto your belly, you want to lean back, and then you power it up to your chest. So I wouldn't bother with those either.
What about just using the axle for pressing and other things like that?
Yep. So using just the axle itself as the, like, let's say you're doing axle
Or
deadlifts,
maybe explain the axle
rows.
to the listeners.
So an axle is normally about a 2-inch thick, it depends on which one you have, but 2 to 2.5-inch thick. So it's like a barbell, but you have to grip it like this essentially.
Like a fat bar.
So yeah, it's just a fat bar. So in strongman, it's called an axle because it's meant to be the axle of some kind of vehicle. So I think traditionally it was from a train. I could be wrong on that, but I think it was a train with big metal wheels that don't rotate. So that's right up strongman's alley. An awkward implement that doesn't rotate, which forces you to put it in this weird position. So in terms of doing the clean and press with an axle, I wouldn't do it, but you could use an axle for like rows, get a bit of extra grip work, deadlifts, depending on the goal of your deadlift. And you could use it for overhead presses or bench presses if you wanted to. Axle by itself is good. I think it's a valuable tool.
I'm a big fan
of
pressing with the fat bar.
Yep.
If I had my whole gym set up and I was training, combat or collision athletes, I'd replace the barbell with a fat bar for all pressing. That I love it that much.
yeah. Just for the extra grip work.
Yeah, just like the robustness of the wrists and elbows and things like that. Like it's so different when you're pressing a thick bar than the thin barbell, and the carryover is insane too, just to the normal barbell pressing anyway.
Yeah, so, for sure.
Yeah.
I could definitely, you could definitely use it for that sort of thing. Even curls if you wanted to.
Oh, hell yeah. That's my favorite.
But yeah, in terms of actual axle clean and press, the continental style, I would not. Yeah. I can't think of a situation, even in the off season, someone trying to gain weight. The only situation I can think is if someone had like a strongman competition and they were doing that and fighting, which again I wouldn't advise. But those are the three main overheads. So the next category would be carries. So like yoke walk, farmer's walk. Those are
probably the most common. common ones you
Yeah.
see in combat sports training.
And so farmer's walk or frame carry, so you're holding a heavy implement each hand and then just trying to walk with it. I actually think these could be one of the exercises that could be used in a fighter's training program. There, you can load it, so it's not going to be basically you can regulate the loading really well. It's not like it's a set weight or anything like that. Um, and it's going to load the upper back and traps really well, but also it really hits the grip. And depending on how far you're carrying it and whatnot, there's going to be a little bit of cardiovascular work, but you wouldn't really, like if you're doing MMA or some combat sport, like I wouldn't advise using farmer's walk for your cardio training. But there's, there's a little bit of carryover there. But yeah, I wouldn't say like stop your road work and just get the
Yeah.
farmer's bars. It's not going to end well.
How far would you, and I guess it's hard to say how heavy, but how far would you recommend, say, carrying a farmer's walk per set if you're preparing for a sport like MMA or jiu-jitsu?
I would go about 50 meters. So I can't remember what that is in feet. But yeah, normally something like it depends on what gym you're training at. I would just go normally there and back. So most of the gyms here are like 20 to 25-meter lanes, and I'll just go there and back. Um, yeah, for say 2 to 3 sets. But it's the other thing, it's similar to a trap bar deadlift, right? So if someone's working around back issues or whatnot, you can keep a relatively upright torso, and plus the farmer's handles tend to be quite high off the floor, opposed to like a traditional deadlift where it's quite low, like 8.5 inches or whatever it is off the floor. So they can be, so it's a good exercise in that regard. Yoke walk though, I wouldn't. Yeah, yoke walk personally, I don't think would have any place. I know some people are a fan of a chain yoke, so
Mm.
that's with chains hanging off the sides of the crossbar. That makes it really unstable. Um, Personally, I am not like the biggest fan of it, but I could see someone doing it. Basically, it's not gonna, because of the unstable nature of it. You're not gonna. Well, you shouldn't load it super heavy, but it'll be a bit of extra core work, a bit of stabilizing as you're walking with it. Again, though, you could probably just get the same sort of effect from doing like a bunch of payload presses and other core exercises that are a bit safer and just quicker. Like, let's say you were to do chain yoke, it's going to take you maybe 10 minutes to set up, opposed to walking over to the cable station, sticking the pin in the weight you want, and then doing your payload press. So, like MMA training as it is, so many qualities to train for. So I would guess most people are wanting to, keep their S&C training as minimal as possible.
Mm.
So yeah, in terms of those carries, frame carry, farmer's walk, I think could be used um, in like for fight training. Again, though, not going super heavy, um, but it depends. Like in terms of RPE, I would say something like a 7 out of 10, in terms of just how hard the set of 50 meters felt.
Are you trying to walk
Um,
that as fast as possible, or are you just kind of just walking?
so for strongman competition, I would advise to go as fast as possible. If I was doing for fight training, I would just try to go. Normally, I'd say like as fast as you can comfortably. So
Mm.
you're wanting to go like generally short steps, fast feet. You're not wanting to break into a full-on jog. But I wouldn't worry about, so because the goal of the strongman is to complete the course as fast as possible. That's who wins. You're really kind of pushing the limits in terms of finding that gait, like that length of your gait, the speed of your feet, that you can do everything you can. And a lot of the times, like you might lose balance and lose the farmer's walk. That's just part of training. I don't think it's worth trying to go that fast for fighters, really. Like you're not going to score any points, on the judges' scorecard by doing a faster farmer's walk. But you can still get the benefit of doing the farmer's walk by just holding back a little bit. But yeah, yoke walk, personally, I wouldn't really advise. Those are the two main carries. And then the other category I would say is like the main strongman ones are loading. So stones, like picking up a heavy stone in the front and loading it, or a keg, sandbag, that sort of thing. I don't. So there could be some. I know there is some. Uh, there's that line of thinking of, wrestling with the sandbag or whatever helps you develop that grip for wrestling. Personally, like I think doing one of those loading exercises, again, will definitely get you stronger in a general sense. And also, it does train a form of like hip extension that I think translates well to wrestling and that sort of thing, driving the hips forward that you don't necessarily get with normal barbell training. So let's say I've got a sandbag on my lap. I would then extend my hips. I'm extending it forward basically to where the camera is, and you go into kind of a triple extension, um, and you're pulling like the implement into yourself at the same time as your hips are going forward. So it really hits the hips quite well, provided you're doing it right, which you don't get that from a squat or a deadlift. So that particular aspect I think can be quite beneficial. But I don't, so this is another line of thinking that led to, I'm not sure if you remember when Mariusz Pudzianowski debuted in MMA. So for anyone listening, this is 5 times World's Strongest Man winner. He transitioned into MMA.
In the
He
Russian
was
league, right?
known,
Was it KS, whatever that
yeah,
one is? Yeah.
he's with them now. I think he was with Strikeforce when he started, or he was at some stage. But so he was known in the strongman world as having like great conditioning, and he was really good at those front carries. Like not just like he was literally the best in the world at them. So people kind of said, he's carrying 160 kgs, like manhandling it, blitzing it, doing it for like a minute to 75 seconds without stopping, maintaining like a really good speed. So, on the internet, it was, man, he's doing this. I can't remember who his first fight was, but he fought Tim Sylvia like really early in his career. And it was like everyone I remember on the internet saying, man, he's just going to manhandle Tim Sylvia. Tim Sylvia, not the best wrestler in the world, but could still shut him down. Like at the end of the day, wrestling is wrestling. Like the sandbag will help you develop a bit of grip for sure, but you like to rely on that to develop grip for wrestling. Do not do it. Like it's just not. It's not even in the same ballpark. But to help complement it, it definitely could help a little bit. And again, with that triple extension and being quite hip dominant, it can be good. Just to add to that though, Atlas stones, so the round stones, I actually wouldn't do. So the motion is pretty much the same whether you're loading a sandbag or a stone. Like there's a little bit of difference with the grip, but I would say do it with a sandbag. Um, there's not really too much benefit of doing it with a stone, but I feel like it'll put you at a little bit more of a risk for a bicep tear, which again, why take that risk? In strongman competition, so I don't have a direct study on this, but anecdotally, we've seen a lot of people tear their biceps on stones. And because they're those smooth ones, you actually a lot of the time use tacky. So it's like this glue kind of resin substance to stick yourself to the stone. So if you don't have that, you really have to pull it in really tight, and it can recruit quite a lot of biceps. It's just a lot of strain. Whereas doing it with a sandbag, there's still a small amount of risk, but because you can grip with your fingers a bit more, and because a sandbag's more malleable, you can get it in a nicer position. So yeah, I think loading can be a great movement to assist fight training, but it's not like let's say you wanted to develop just a vicious double leg takedown that no one could stop. You can just drive through people. You should still be doing like wrestling to do that. Don't just start doing a ton of like sandbag loads and thinking you're just going to be able to drive through everyone, because they'll just throw you off center and your power's going to go nowhere. But to complement it, so I think the benefits of the sandbag are going to be that little bit of extra grip, because it's like you want to hold with open hands, pull it in tight. It's going to be training the upper back to hold it in that position. And then it's kind of the actual lower body movement. It's kind of like a hybrid between a front squat and a hip thrust. Again, this is just me talking. It's not like I've got a biomechanics study to say this, but I'm sure you've seen the same thing, that you're sitting in kind of a front squat position, and then imagine driving your hips up on a 45-degree angle. So your hips going forward is what's going to help load the implement. So yeah, those out of those main strongman moves, I think those particular ones, so sandbag, farmers, um, stones, I don't really think is worth it. Axle can be fine in the gym, but definitely not continental clean and press. And log, you could go with a smaller diameter log just to work around injuries, give you an alternative to the barbell. And then the final, I would also add it in as a main one, is like the truck pull. So you can do like to set up a truck and train for MMA, like just, I mean, honestly, you could. It's a lot of setup though. But you might as well do it with a sled. So doing it with a sled or prowler, it's going to be harder anyway, because once you get the vehicle moving with a bit of momentum, like it gets a little bit easier. So the sled or prowler is always going to have that kind of dead resistance, which is good. But I think both the arm over arm variant, so that's where you're sitting down, and imagine where you are in the camera. I'm pulling with a rope, and then there's a vehicle that side of me. I'm pulling it towards me. I think that can actually be a really good exercise, especially if you can get a really long rope. It's going to really hammer the grip and upper back, which if you're more involved with gi, like it can really help develop that endurance. Like let's say you're on in guard and you're grabbing up and pulling collars. Again, like don't just think like, oh, this is all I have to do and then I'm going to dominate gi. No, but it can supplement that training quite well, because you're really developing big pulling power through the upper body, but also because of the nature of driving yourself back, it's kind of like a leg press, kind of like a bigger range of motion leg press. So these strongman exercises in general are quite general exercises. So they're hitting the majority of the body overall. It's not like, say, if we jump, let's say you really needed legs, you could jump on hack squat. You're just going to really hit the legs, not too much else, really hit the quads. But with an arm over arm, there's big time grip, big time upper back, definitely a bit of biceps in there, and also a lot of lower body. And it's not too technical. That's the other thing that can be quite nice about strongman training. It's not going to take, you're not going to have to spend 3 sessions learning how to push a vehicle or push the prowler. You can kind of just jump in and get away with it. I should also mention, I forgot, the last category is throwing. So in strongman, there's keg toss quite a bit. Now there's, I'm not sure if you've seen the Cerberus and Rogue make a sandbag with a handle on it, which
Yeah, I
is
have seen
used
that.
for throwing. I think that's fantastic. So you could do, um, you could do a medicine ball toss, but I actually quite like the idea of the handle, because you'll be holding it like this, right? So your palms are facing down, opposed to the medicine ball holding it like this. I feel like just puts those biceps at a little bit of risk. So I've actually got a friend who tore his bicep doing, it was like a brick toss. So it just
Oh,
puts, it's that same, because you're holding it like this, right? It's
yeah.
putting a bit more, which I can see similar to a medicine ball toss.
How
Whereas
heavy
I
was the
feel like
brick?
it was like 20 kgs or something. So it's
Yeah, it
not,
wasn't too heavy. Yeah.
no, not too heavy, but just that act. That's why I say, like, so again, this is anecdotal, but why, let's say I was getting someone to do that and I wanted to progress the load a little bit, like why do it on a medicine ball when we could just use one of those sandbags? You can load whatever weight you want in it, and you've got that handle. So there's just very minimal risk of tearing. Like I've, I wouldn't say it's impossible, but very minimal risk of tearing your bicep that way. So I think those can be a good alternative to med ball toss or any kind of like vertical throwing. Um, but keg toss itself, you could do as well. So a keg, it has handles, and you'd be holding it like this, a neutral grip. So it can be good. The problem with a keg is it has to land somewhere, and it's a big metal keg, so you kind of have to. It's just a bit of setup work. But let's say like you had a strongman club or something training nearby, and you had access to that. Yeah, you could definitely do that. It's not going to be, um, it's not going to be too detrimental to your training or anything like that.
We can use kettlebells too, right? The old Russian method that's what kettlebells were invented for back in the day, for throwing.
Yep. I
Before,
didn't realize that, but
yeah,
kettlebells
before
for sure.
for the what are they? The fitness people now that have come along and decided to create competitions out of, what do they do? I think they have like a one-arm snatch competition now or something like that. And it's like how many you can do in X time.
Yeah, I'm not too familiar with it.
You're
What do they
lucky.
do? They just used to throw it in like on the grass field or something?
Into sandpits.
Oh yeah.
Stuff like that. So kettlebells are another good way you can do that. I mean, and it lets you load, I guess, the throws heavy too. Obviously, light throws are great, develop speed and power, but I mean, if you have to pick up humans and suplex them, obviously that would be the ideal thing to do in training to develop that strength. But you can supplement it with things like kettlebells, less wear and tear on the body, throw heavy stuff over your head.
And the advantage of that bag would just be you could do it indoors without, like,
that's true.
provided you got a big gym, but it's just so handy. You can just load it up and it doesn't really matter. But yeah, it's kind of they have started using them in competition, so I'll claim it as a strongman exercise. the bag toss.
I'll find that one on Rogue. I'll link it in the description for any listeners that want to potentially grab it. But I wanted to ask you as well, the front loaded carry variations. What do you think about those? You like those for combat sports? So like Zercher carries, bear hug carries, like all the sandbag and whatever carries there.
So the front loaded carries I kind of class as the the loading kind of variant. Yeah. But yeah, I think those would be another good one. Again with the sandbag, so a sandbag you could carry like this way, but also if you stood like so horizontal lengthways, but you can also stand it up, right? And then you could like bear hug grip, you could do gable grip, you could do kind of any kind of grip you want, and then carrying it back and forth. So again, it's not, it will definitely supplement being able to pick someone up, keep them there, and you're just holding and walking back and forth. I think that's a fantastic exercise. And it's not, so again, this is anecdotal, but it's not too taxing of an exercise. So it's obviously going to stress the upper back and the grip quite a lot, but those will generally give out before your legs will. So it's not, depending on like if your particular strength and weaknesses and the weight that you're using, but if you've got a good grip, like a good grip on it as you're walking, let's say you're doing like quite a decent weight, the grip will start to give, and I think that can be a great thing to help, again, supplement that aspect of grappling.
I like what you said about it's not as fatiguing in a sense that it doesn't carry over. Like when I have access to a sandbag, I love just carrying it like that. And then at the time it sucks, but you don't have that residual soreness going into, well, unless it's the first time you're doing it, but you don't have that huge soreness and fatigue and stuff, later in the day or the following day.
Yeah. And it's like it's a lot easier opposed to asking a training partner if you can pick them up and carry them around the gym.
Usually they're not heavy enough anyway.
Yeah, that's true. That's definitely the benefit of the sandbag. But those kind of front carries in general, provided you're doing, like, I would say in terms of fatigue, doing having the bag horizontally and holding it this way will be a little bit more fatiguing. But doing that vertical, like you could also do it with a boxing bag, like having it vertical and then gripping and carrying it. It tends to be a little bit less fatiguing. But I would say in general, those front carries, again, unless it's like really new to you or you just go ridiculously heavy the first time doing it, I would say it's a little bit less fatiguing than, say, doing like sets of squats and whatnot. It's obviously a little bit different stimulus, but again, if you've just got a general strength training plan with the goal of just carrying that strength over to your training, it could be a good option.
On that truck pull as well, I guess if you don't have a truck, you can just drag a sled, right? That's like essentially a sled pull. Yeah. Have you done it with the Exogeny before?
I have actually, yes, and that's a pretty good alternative as well. The only hard thing about that was I think you needed. We had to do it with two people, like one person to help set it back or something like that.
Okay.
I can't say that we were experts with it, but it was actually really good. especially in terms of space in that as well. So if you don't have like, because you can just set it up against like a pole or whatever.
Yeah.
It's not like you have to have space to, you have the rope like that you're attached to, and then you have to have the sled as well. Um, like you could just stand right next to where you're starting and then pull from there. But otherwise, a real easy way to set it up is if you just get an old tire. The old tire sled's
Yeah.
a good easy setup. So you basically get a tire, drill a bolt into it, attach a rope to that, and it's actually like if you use it on a surface with lots of friction, I would just do that opposed to having to load it really heavy, because that's just a pain otherwise, like having to load stuff really heavy. That was a good thing about that exogeny. You could make it quite heavy just really easily. You
Mm.
know, again, opposed to with sleds a lot of the time. Again, depending on the surface, but if it's just a regular AstroTurf or whatever, they slide quite well. So you
Yeah.
have to just load so much weight on it to get what you want. Whereas with that exogeny, you can just adjust it and it's got a like a good resistance.
Yeah. For
Um,
anyone listening, the exogen essentially is like a friction. It's like a friction dial, like a rope, and you can just essentially dial the friction up, and then it just adds resistance on the rope. And it's essentially you can use it in pretty much anywhere. Because all you need to do is tie it to something sturdy, and you could do
yeah,
your truck pull or your sled drag or whatever with that without having, I don't know, other equipment that you need.
yeah. And like it's a good, you can set up doing arm over arm rows and stuff towards you as well.
Mm.
Seems seems pretty versatile, and yeah, it doesn't take up too much space. So that's the like obviously the I suppose the gold standard would be you have access to a like a super fancy gym with all the best equipment. But if you don't have space or whatnot, it's a pretty good alternative. Otherwise, yeah, just the good old tire sled. If you're not worried about carrying or dragging it down in front of the neighbors,
Yeah. At least it's not as noisy as a metal sled scraping on the road.
yeah, that's true.
How many times a week would you have MMA, jiu-jitsu athlete, or any other combat sport athlete, I guess, do some kind of supplemental strongman training within their training program? Is there like a too many days a week? Is there a kind of a sweet spot that you see that works well?
Yeah, so there's a couple different approaches that I think can be taken with it. I would do so. This is what I would personally do: is either do it a little bit. I would say do 3 days of strength training far away from a comp, or sorry, from a fight,
Mm,
um, and then you could get rid of some of those bigger. Like once you're getting closer to comp season, I think the strongman exercises can be good to maintain like a large range of qualities. So, for example, that how I was talking about that arm over arm, it's
mm,
hitting quite a lot of different muscle groups at the same time. So I feel like you'll be able to maintain a certain level of strength without like having a large amount of volume that's going to fatigue you pre-comp, if that makes sense. So
yeah.
let's say like I don't know, 20 weeks out from the fight, and you had I don't know 3 sets of squats, and then you were doing I don't know, just 1 or 2 sets of the arm over arm. Maybe towards the fight, you could start to get rid of those squats, or just do them very minimally, but do a little bit more of the sled drags, just because it's going to maintain like again like training economy
Mm,
wise, you can get away like you're not trying to like gain massive. Well, I wouldn't advise trying to gain massive strength going into the fight, right? You should do your you should kind of be done once you start the actual camp and you're just maintaining what you have. And I think those kind of exercises could be used well to maintain. Again, I don't have direct like research to use on that, but I've used a similar thing on myself and with other athletes. But I would say something like 3 times a week, further away from a fight to improve qualities, and then I would probably drop it down to just 2 times a week, potentially even one the closer you get to a fight, just to maintain those qualities.
I like the idea of that heavy sled drag as you get into fight camp, because obviously you don't have that eccentric action, right?
Yeah,
So you have less muscle soreness, less fatigue. So for anyone listening, obviously the eccentric action is that muscle lengthening phase. Like for example, the descent and the squat. And if you're doing heavy loads or a lot of reps things, they can come bite you in the ass with a lot of different soreness. Whereas You're just dragging the sled. It's only that muscle shortening phase, like riding a bike, basically. And you kind of, it's almost like a restorative feeling too afterwards. You know, your knees feel good, hips feel good. You know, a lot of blood in there. Yeah, it's a nice concept, that one.
And when I've talked about doing that sort of thing before, I will get people again, like, so most of the people I talk to are more biased towards strength. So their concern will be like, oh, my squat's going to get a lot weaker, you know. And like the truth is, yes, it will in that period leading up to the fight. But it doesn't, as long as you maintain your like general leg strength, it doesn't really matter if you suddenly lose, you know, a bit of your like motor pattern towards the squat. It's not really, you know, you're not going to try squat to your opponent. At least I hope not. But if you can still load the sled nice and heavy to keep that general strength in your legs, you can give it enough stimulus to maintain basically for a little while.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Yeah.
you can always pick that up. Let's say you were wanting to, let's say you were a fighter, but you still had this desire to get stronger over time, and you just really like the power lifts, like squat, bench, deadlift. You can definitely resume those after the fight once you've had a break, whatever. It's not, and this once you get that motor pattern back, it's gonna come back. It's not like it's disappeared forever, which I'm just saying that because I get a lot of people that as soon as they feel their squat has gone down a little bit, they panic. The goal, if you're training for a fight, the goal is to perform as best you can in the fight. So it doesn't necessarily matter if suddenly when you're squatting 5 sets of 5 a week and feeling like squats were super easy, suddenly you're only doing one like at a lighter weight so it doesn't destroy your sparring. It does, like the worst thing, what normally happens, right, is someone will get to that phase, then they'll get a bit insecure and then max out their squats. Like, no, I've lost strength. I need to test. And then yes, they max out and do worse. But that's to be expected. But you'll be maintaining enough strength for the fight. But I don't know. Have you had that similar train of thought in like people that you've trained?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think most people confuse the idea of a certain lift maybe going down to reductions in being able to produce force, right? So obviously when we're talking about things like squats and things, there's a huge coordination component and there's coordination under heavy load. And if you aren't doing heavy loads, so like a good example is someone who runs the 20 rep squat program, right? And very rarely do you see case studies of people improving their 1RM after doing 6 weeks of 20 rep squat program, because one, you're not training that rep range, but two, you're not developing that load specific coordination with heavier loads. So when people move away from the squat and they go, oh, my squat's going down, it doesn't mean that you're suddenly weaker. It can often mean that you haven't, I guess, maintained or developed that coordination with that lift. Whereas you can still maintain that strength, you know, if you're doing heavy sleds, as you mentioned, you're still producing a lot of force doing that, but you're just doing it, doing something different. So yeah, like I try to cover that a lot when I'm writing about it on the blog as well. Like strength isn't just most people equate strength to squat, bench, and deadlift, right? Because that's kind of like the market, the general markers. But just because you can't squat, bench, or deadlift a lot doesn't mean that you're not strong. It just depends on the task or whatever activity it is you're doing.
That was a good way of putting it. That's exactly what I was trying to say. And funnily enough, that's where strongman came from essentially. So nowadays, if we're looking at strongman as a sport, all the athletes train the actual implements, right? But when it started, there was no training for strongman. There were NFL players, shot putters, whatnot, and they just were all put into this comp and like a bunch of random events, and let's see who's the strongest. So it's kind of, if you think of I don't think I'm articulate enough to make the comparison, but let's say you're doing how it was back then for strongman. You just train in the gym, right? You want to get generally strong, and then you find out on the day what actual implements you need to do, and you transfer that strength over. You're trying to do the same thing with your fighting. So you're trying to maintain, like you've done your strength training in the off season or whatever, and then you're maintaining it with a little bit of these strongman exercises, if that's what your plan is. And then you're using that to just show your strength on the day if you need to, in the form of whatever happens in your fight.
Yeah, for sure. That's good. What's your take on strongman medleys for conditioning? Because I think that's outside of just pure farmer sort of stuff. I think that's where you see a strongman being, I guess, its application being most used is
Yeah,
even within other sports as well. It's often strongman circuits are kind of like, uh,
yeah,
uh, I guess, a way that fighters use to disguise strength training when they go to the gym,
yeah.
but it's not really strength training. So I guess what's your take on using that as a conditioning modality?
I think it can be good. Like kind of with some of those reasons we talked about before, some of the exercises aren't too taxing and they're not that technical, so you can kind of do them
Mm,
under a high level of fatigue like you would be in like in a circuit. I don't think personally, I don't think it's like optimal. I think you'd be better off um, just doing whatever exercises like a little bit more specific to fighting. But I don't really think. Let's say again more towards the off season, you wanted to maintain a bit of conditioning and you enjoyed strongman exercises. I think that's fine.
mm.
But maybe if you have, let's say you're already doing a bunch of other training, um, and then towards closer to the fight, you've got some kind of a higher intensity day. I don't know. I just feel like there would be better, more specific exercises to do to develop the qualities for fighting. But yeah, so I can't. As much as I love strongman, I don't think it's the best, like the best approach. But I think it can be done.
Yeah.
Um, but it's like let's say we're gonna set up a like what's the most common MMA circuit? I always see it's not really strongman, but like sledgehammer slams,
Yeah,
maybe
definitely.
some kind of tire flip.
Tire flip.
So just to go over tire flip quickly, I think it can be a good exercise. Um, Again, it's got a level of triple extension in there, and provided you've got a tire that lets you hold it with a hammer grip, I wouldn't do it this kind of
That's how you
grip.
see
So
everyone doing it.
yeah, that puts, especially if it's heavy, a lot of strain on the biceps. Seen a lot of people tear their biceps doing it that way. Um, so if you are going to do tire flip, you want to find a tire that's high enough that when you're bent over, so I think rugby scrum position, like torso about parallel with the ground, you want your upper chest driving into the tire, and you want your hands this way. That is a relatively safe exercise, still with a bit of triple extension, but it's not. You can't regulate the load. Like it's always just one. So
Mm.
if you happen to have like a good tire for you personally and you enjoy doing it, I think it's good. But yeah, otherwise, it's just like let's say you're training with a team of 10 people or 5 people, whatever. It's very unlikely you guys are all going to be the same strength. And then as soon as you guys get a bit stronger, you probably need a heavier tire. And it's just hard to load. Like I've experimented with putting sandbags or whatever in tires, and it's just yeah, I just don't think. I think you might as well just load. You could do a sandbag load, and then you can actually be explosive and throw the sandbag.
Mm.
So from the from that front squat kind of position, I would
Nice,
do that
nice.
over a tire flip. Um, but yeah, anyway, just to go back to so the circuit, I was saying sledgehammer
Yeah.
like slams, tire flip. What else? Oh, some
Farmer's
kind.
walk
Yeah,
sometimes.
farmers
Yeah.
walk a bit, some kind of sled thing.
Yeah.
Um, Again, like to maintain, I feel like it's quite general. Like you're
Yeah,
gonna
for
hit a
sure.
little bit of everything, and cardiovascular wise, it's not like super. Like you could probably do stuff with a little bit more research behind it, but it's a general like training way
Yeah.
of doing circuits. But in terms of setup and that, really easy. So that's a positive.
Yeah, it can be, I guess it can be a
Um,
nice way for if you just finished a fight, you've got a little bit of transition time, a long time before your next fight. It's something you can do just for like cross training,
yeah,
just some real
yeah.
general prep,
And
bit of
I
fun.
do like, even myself, not as the biggest enjoyer of cardio exercise, I think it's quite like strongman circuits can be quite fun. So
Yeah, that's true.
if you've just come off like a grueling fight prep with different kind, I don't know, doing sprints or plyos, whatever, um, like doing strongman circuits could just be a bit of a mental break, um, while still maintaining quite a few different qualities. So I think that could be useful, but yeah, I don't think my personal opinion is I wouldn't think it's I feel like they're overhyped in the MMA world. Like they're just, I see them
Mm.
very prominently. But I don't know. Like, what are your thoughts on that? I'll be
Yeah,
curious.
no, I agree with you completely. Obviously, it's as a general mode of training for sure. If you're far
Yeah,
away from a fight, but yeah, I mean, often it's used as a substitute for strength training. In my eyes, I see, because it's like, oh, we're just going to smash you up with some circuits, you know, that's strength
yeah.
conditioning, and
I
then
w-
it just adds on so much extra training volume on top of, you know, the rounds of
yeah,
sparring, peb, or whatever else, rolling, everything that you don't need to do. If you need to target whatever adaptation you want to target within conditioning, you can do that, you know,
yeah,
within the sport itself. Or if you're going away from the sport to do it, do something off feet, something that's relatively
yeah,
easy on the body. You can control the intensity, things like that.
yeah.
Yeah,
I agree.
yeah, for sure. Um, I think we covered pretty much everything. Is there anything else that you want to cover in here on strongman stuff?
Not really. Just wanted to talk about the exercises. So, and the other things that I would see, I suppose the misconceptions about it. So mainly the
Mm,
main one I used to see was that thing about Mariusz Pudzianowski. The fact
mm,
that, so the big thing that I used to see was the fact he could essentially sprint with this front carry for a minute straight without slowing down. That would translate to him just being able to punch for a minute straight, just massive power
yeah,
in the fight. And we saw, like, real world example, it just did not happen, and he gassed out. So don't make that mistake of thinking if you become a beast at these strongman exercises, it doesn't mean it's going to directly transfer to the cage. You still need to do your, like, priority has to be your fight training. You can There will definitely be a little bit of carryover in a general sense, but yeah, it's not gonna, like, just watch those early fights of Mariusz Pudzianowski. You'll see he uh, like, again, a little bit of lack of experience as well would have led to him not being able to control his breathing and whatnot and gas out a bit sooner. But yeah, it's not gonna. That's a sentiment I used to see, not so much now, but every now and again I'll still see it. That, you know, if you suddenly become an absolute monster at these carries, it's just going to carry over. If you're suddenly carrying a 160 kg sandbag, like, you're going to be able to throw heavyweights around. It's just not the case.
yeah.
But if you're a fantastic wrestler, then you'll be able to throw, you know, heavyweights around if you're relatively a heavier weight class fighter.
Oh, no, perfect. That perfect way to end it too. Is there anywhere where people can find you, follow you, or anything like that if they want to learn more about you?
Just Instagram. So the Wolfman Colm Woulfe. That's the main one at the moment,
Sweet.
and
I'll
I do
link it
have the
up.
same thing on Facebook, but more active on the Instagram.
Perfect. I'll check that down in the description for anyone who wants to give you a follow. But thanks for coming on, Colin. Really appreciate it.
No worries. Thanks for having me.